Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I welcome you on a Moscow conference on international security. For the seventh time, the leaders of defense ministries and military leaders from different regions of the world rallied here to openly and trustfully discuss the broad spectrum of most important problems of global security and to exchange opinions on issues to strengthen international military cooperation. I'm pleased to mention that the interest towards our conference is growing from year to year. Personally seen a larger number of experts, representatives of international organizations and mass media representatives which carefully watch the work of the forum and analyze in details its outcomes. And this is not incidental. Today, the world is going through a critical stage. The relationship between the states are changing, and more the military solution is coming to the agenda. And pretension of separate countries for exclusivity push others for new arms race. Against this ground, the anti-Russian rhetoric is developing and unfriendly military activity is building up near our borders. Under these conditions, the leadership of Russian Federation assumes steps to ensure national security. The basic focus is placed on the struggle with terrorist threat, the scale of which in recent years considerably expanded. In September 2015, Russia has taken the decision to provide help to the legitimate government of Syria in the struggle with ISIS and other terrorist organizations. I'd like to remind that before the so-called war with terrorists was headed by the anti-terrorist coalition headed by the United States of America. It consisted of 30 advanced in military attitude states, and considerable resources are used, including aviation and special forces. However, nobody saw visible results, and the territories under the control of ISIS in Iraq and Syria continued to expand. It is difficult to believe that the most powerful coalition could not defeat terrorists. Perhaps the target was different: destabilize the region and to fortify its military and economic presence. The situation changed after the beginning of the operation of the Russian aerospace forces and creation of anti-terrorist alliance with participation of Iran, Russia, and Turkey. The major part of territory of Syria was liberated, and with others, we conduct negotiations to put down weapons, and the creation of pseudo-caliphate idea was destroyed. And the combination of our efforts with coalition, the fight with ISIS could be over much earlier and with lesser losses. The struggle with international terror inseparably related with the solution of humanitarian problems. As an example, I'll give you the situation in Eastern Ghouta. Despite the creation of the de-escalation zone, Jabhat al-Nusra and a friendly terrorist organization continued to impose fire on Damascus from mortars and small arms and seized peaceful population in occupied territories. Humanitarian aid and pharmaceuticals were not received by the citizens and were used by the terrorists or even sold on the market. Under these conditions, the Syrian government forces faced a very difficult task to release from this enclave peaceful citizens, and that was organized under the auspices of the Center of Reconciliation of Rival Parties in Syria, led by Russia. Today, more than 155,000 peaceful citizens were relocated, and people started to come back to their houses. And during many years, 12,000 schoolboys and girls attended school. Russian servicemen provided nutrition, medical aid and lodging. We continue to create conditions for free passage of humanitarian convoys under the auspices of UN. Only to Duma city, they have delivered 445,000 tons of humanitarian aid. This is a real input of the Russian Federation to execute the Resolution 2401 of the Security Council of United Nations. This work is carried out in close cooperation with the United Nations Organization, International Committee of Red Cross, and Syrian Arab Red Sickle. And it is necessary to mention, after the defeat of the so-called Islamic State, the members of terrorist groups from Syria and Iraq are moving to different regions. There grows the terrorist activity in Africa, and jihad tourists are coming back to Asia and Europe. As a consequence to that, trans-border criminal activity is growing, and there is a fruitful environment for extremist and separatist movements all over the world is growing. In many regions of planet, including Southeastern Asia, there created the conditions for terrorist cells. And today, without any exaggeration, we have a global threat. Not a single state could feel safe and secure against this threat. This situation is aggravated by the fact that the terrorists are using most modern means of destruction, attack drones. Thus, the drones used by the terrorists in Syria are equipped with ammunition and are capable to operate at the range of more than 100 kilometers, and their creation couldn't have been possible without cooperation of developed countries. And during the last 3 months, we have engaged more than 17 of drones like this, and the use of such means in densely populated areas may bear catastrophic consequences, also critical for infrastructure. Under this context, the terrorists shouldn't get access to the weapons of mass destructions and chemical agents. Syrian experience demonstrates the fact that chemical agents are often used by terrorists for provocative purposes in order to shed chaos among the population and to shape false perception about the conflict among global community. Unfortunately, these tricks work. For instance, the staged chemical attack at Hanshuan on the 4th of April 2017 was the purpose for the U.S. Navy to inflict massive missile strike on Shayrat Air Base. The attempts to organize the same provocations in Syria are detected even today. And we believe that when assessing the cases of the use of mass destruction weapons, there shouldn't be any double standard approach. We need to conduct very thorough and multilateral analysis in line with the requirements of international law. The time has come to combine the efforts of the global community, including the defense ministries, to neutralize global threat coming from terrorism. We see good perspectives to adjust exchange of information, to study the experience to counter terrorism, to support contacts on special services and intelligence communities. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, here we have our colleagues from Africa. Unfortunately, at present, this region also has a very dramatic situation. Actual disintegration of Libya led to fortification of terrorist threat in northern and central part of the continent. Its growth negatively influences the condition of regional security as a whole. We support the efforts of African countries to stabilize the situation in the struggle with terrorism. We count that during the discussion, the representatives of African countries will share their assessment of the situation on the continent. We also pay a lot of attention to the situation in Latin America, and we welcome the striving of regional states to expand cooperation with Russia, including through the lines of defense ministries. The example of such cooperation is our joint work with Argentinian colleagues for the search of the missing submarine. The approach to ensure security have always regional specificity and should be taken into consideration when shaping the global vision of the problem. We are thankful to our friends from South America for participating in the forum. Traditionally, the program of the conference has the issues of security in Asian region, which today is the locomotive of the global economic growth. In recent years, the cooperation of military ministries of Russia and Asian countries considerably increased, and in this respect we would like to talk about the strategic relations with China, India, Vietnam, Laos, and Myanmar, and new cooperation we receive with Brunei, Cambodia, Malaysia, Indonesia, Philippines, both on bilateral and multilateral formats, also including the line and communication through ASEAN organization. A partnership is also in demand because Asia still has challenges in security which requires joint efforts. Primarily, that is the crisis among the Korean Peninsula, which involves more and more states striving to become more important in terms of influence in the regions. We believe there is no military solution to the Korean problem. Pressure and threats are not effective means to regulate the crisis. Moreover, continuous pumping up of tension in the situation and demonstration of military force could lead to incidents and even to the armed conflicts with very dramatic consequences for the whole region. We see the continuing worsening of the situation in Afghanistan. More than 15 years of presence of United States and NATO contingents on this ground never led to the normalization of the situation. In its essence, the United States are striving at any conditions to increase their presence in Central Asians to extrapolate their powerful influence on the neighboring countries with Afghanistan, which does not meet the interests of the neighboring states and is a destabilization global factor. We still have threats on for the states, allies of Russia, on CSTO treaty. Afghanistan may become a shelter not only for ISIS terrorists, but also for other organizations, and from there they will spread through all Eurasian continent. Today in Afghanistan we have more than 4.5 thousand former ISIS members, and their number is permanently growing. The Afghan conflict couldn't be settled on the battlefield. In order to solve it, we need no non-standard approach. It is important to use the potential of all regional countries and international organizations, including CSTO and SOC. The joint efforts here should be concentrated to create the state of law and respective institutions of power. One more conditions for stability: non-interference into internal affairs of the states, counteractions to the policy of color revolutions, hybrid wars, and so-called soft power, the stabilization of political situation under the guise of democratization leads not to the prosperity of people, but to create new zones of conflict, the reserves for terrorists of all shades. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, in March, in its address to the Federal Assembly, President of Russian Federation, Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin, in detail described the pitiful state of European security, and the major reasons is the growing of NATO military contingents close to the Russian borders, the change in the doctrine of United States on the use of nuclear weapons, secession of Washington from the anti-missile defense treaty, deployment of elements of the global anti-missile defense beyond the territory of the U.S. territory on the European continent and in Asia. Today, nobody doubts that American anti-missile defense is a serious destabilizing factor. It's a stimulus for the arms race and rude infringement of international obligations, including the INF treaty. We also are concerned about the continuous growing of the contingent of American troops in Eastern Europe. There is a paradox situation. NATO strives to augment and upgrade the military infrastructure near the Russian borders, and the public opinion is shaped, and there is a myth about the growing threat for Europe from the neighbor. They threaten themselves with the unexisting Russian threat, and then they increase their military potential in a planned manner. Today, in the Baltics and in Poland, we see the deployment of 10,000 military contingents with all advanced and attack weapons. We see the growing activity of the U.S. Navy and other NATO countries in Black and Baltic Seas. We see the growing number of exercises and training, and they bear the clearly seen anti-Russian directions. The sorties of NATO aviations are growing. Beginning of January, the fighters of Russian aerospace forces scrambled to intercept NATO aviation 25 times. As a result of this, the incident threat and incident potential is growing, and defense ministries more than once requested NATO to start the dialogue. However, Brussels is not ready for the dialogue. On the other hand, we are not prepared to knock on the closed door, and we will not leave without attention this growing threat, and the military potential of our armed forces will be supported at the level which will guarantee the military security of Russia and its allies. Esteemed ladies and gentlemen, the challenges and threats in the sphere of security are changing, and that requires analysis and the search for joint solutions. Now, today, then more than ever, we have to think how to ensure this international stability and sustainable development of civilization. The Russian side is sure that the basis for the global security couldn't be based on the pretensions on exclusivity, disrespect to the interests of other states, and also infringements on the laws of international law. The backbone of such a system should be the principle of inseparable security. The security of one state should not be ensured at the expense of security of the other state. We believe that in the course of this conference, we will see constructive ideas which could be taken as a foundation for this new, renewed system of global security. I wish you all successful work, interesting discussion, and a pleasant stay in Moscow. Thank you for your attention.